17, verses 1 through 9, where we read these words. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground, and they were overcome with fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Get up! Do not be afraid! And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself, all alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. And as you are seated, I want you to kind of ponder with me a question. How many of you have used the word transfigured in your everyday speech in the last week? How many of you have used the word transfigured in your everyday speech in the last month? You have? Well, I'm impressed. What happened? How many of you have used the word transfigured in your speech in the last year? 1. How many of you use that word ever in your speech? 2. I have used that word once a year for the past 35, 36 years, something like that. On this Sunday. Now, I want to ask you a question. In the church, we sometimes, we come up with these fancy words that people don't understand. Wouldn't it be easier if we were to use a different word? Wouldn't it make a lot more sense if we used a word that we understood? Yeah? Lionel gives me a hard time about calling this place back here the narthex. A lot of people don't know what a narthex is, unless you've been in the church all your life. But if you're not, you don't have a clue what a narthex is. But transfiguration, most people in the world have no clue what that word means. But what if we changed the word to transformation? What if we changed it to transformation? Could the story make a little bit more sense? In the New Common English Bible, that's the word that they use. And it goes this way. And Jesus was transformed before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Now, doesn't that make a little bit more sense? He was transformed before them, kind of like Lina was talking about the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. The caterpillar is transformed from a caterpillar into a beautiful butterfly. But too often, when we read this story, we think that it's only a story about Jesus. It's a story about Jesus going up the mountain and getting dazzling white and just all kinds of fancy pyrotechnics take place and all of this. But what I want to propose to you today is that it is about transformation, but the story is much more about the transformation of Peter and James and John than it is about Jesus. Jesus was transformed, but it's also about the transformation of us. Let's kind of go back to the story. The day began, as most days, with Jesus. Jesus gets up and the disciples kind of get moving, and Jesus speaks to the disciples. He speaks to Peter and James and John and says, Hey guys, I want to take you somewhere. I want to take you up the mountain. And so they begin to follow Jesus up the mountain. But I need to let you know that 6 days before this experience, Jesus had a conversation with Peter. And the conversation with Peter went like this. Peter, who are folks saying that I am? What are folks saying about me? And Peter says, well, some folks are saying that you might be Elijah. Some say that you might be John the Baptist come back. Or some say that you might even be Jeremiah. And Jesus says, but Peter, what about you? What about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter says to Jesus, Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus just smiled, gets a big old smile, and Jesus is excited and said, Peter, you got it. You got that answer from God. God let you in on this. You understand. You did not get that answer out of books or from teachers. You understand. God spoke to you, and you understand. Well, 6 days later after that conversation, Jesus is taking Peter and James and John up the mountain. And they're going up the mountain, and as they go up the mountain, as they experience the mountain, have the mountain experience, each one of their lives were transformed. They were never the same again. They were never the same again because they experienced in that situation the power and the presence of God. They experienced on the mountaintop the power and presence of God, and their lives were transformed. Because of what happened on the mountain with Jesus, their Christ, their lives were never the same again. And what I pray is that we too, all of us, will someday in our lives experience transformation as well. I pray that when God's glory comes in front of us, we will open our eyes and we will see it. I pray that when God's glory shows up, we will let ourselves not be overcome by fear, but that we will be overcome by God's love, which just pours into our heart, into our lives, and into our beings. I pray that when God's glory comes, we will allow God's glory to shine in us and through us. And as we come down from the mountain, we will allow God to shine through us to the world around us. I pray that that's the way that we'll be transformed. Because you see, I believe that one of the missions of the church, one of the missions for all of us as followers of Jesus Christ, is to be a community of faith. To be a community of faith where transformation can happen. We are called to be a community of faith where transformation can happen. It's one of the most important missions of the church to be that vessel where transformation can take place. I mentioned, or you heard Angel speak earlier about their experience last week at Lakeview. As I mentioned, we had 10 young people and 2 adults that went to Lakeview. And I pray that in that weekend for them, in some way, transformation took place. I know that it was a wonderful experience for all of our young people. But I pray that for some of them, it was a place of transformation. That their lives were changed, not just for the moment, but forever in some way. That they experienced the power and presence of God. Because you see, our mission as a church at one level is to be a vessel, to be a community of faith where people can be transformed, where people can experience the power and the presence of God. And I pray that part of what it means for all of us is that we can help create that vessel, that place, that experience where transformation can take place. Why? Because all of our lives can be transformed by the power and presence of God. I also pray that our church can be a place in this community where not only can their lives be transformed by God, but in that transformation, and as that transformation takes place, we can be both reconciled to God and also reconciled to our neighbors. We as a church can set the example of how to be reconciled with God and with neighbor. Last Sunday I talked with you a little bit about a conversation that Lyanna and I had the week before. It was a conversation that we had with a resident of our neighborhood, and this woman was with us and was very concerned about, these are her words, I shared with you that she was very concerned about those people that your church helps. She was very concerned about those people that your church helps, our church helps. And so we had a conversation with her, but this week, Lyanna talked with her some more. Why did she talk with her some more? Because we believe that one of the roles of the church is to be a place, to be a vessel, to be a community of faith where transformation can take place. And where the reconciliation between God and neighbor can take place. And what I want to say to you is that transformation is not a little bitty small thing. It's not like, it's much bigger than a fresh coat of paint or an upgraded operating system. It is metamorphosis. It is wholesale change from the bottom up and from the inside out. Transformation is something that literally changes our lives and our perspective on the world. Now, I have to be honest with you. Transformation is not something that I always want for my own life. That is something that God wants to do with me on a regular basis, but transformation is not something that I often want in my own life, because what that means sometimes is that I have to change my ways, I have to change my thinking. You see, I don't know about you, but I like some of the indulgences that I participate in. I like some of my petty idiosyncrasies that people on our staff make fun of from time to time. That's who I am. As broken and as flawed as I am, I'm comfortable with that. I like me. I know me like the back of my hand. It's easy. I don't have to think about it. It's so much easier than transformation. But sometimes, God calls us to change. Sometimes God calls me to change. And sometimes God calls me to do a new thing or to think a different way or to be a different way. But summoning that energy, sustaining that change, sometimes seems nearly impossible. So let's think about this story for just a moment. The disciples go up the mountain with Jesus. They go up the mountain with Jesus. They're not expecting anything. It's just a regular day. They're following Jesus around and all of that. And then Jesus is transformed before them. And they experience the power and the presence of God. They were afraid. They were afraid. And I can imagine that I would be afraid as well. They are not overwhelmed with the pyrotechnics and all that. They've seen Jesus do all kinds of things, but they are afraid. They were afraid. And they're on the mountaintop. There on the mountaintop, their lives are transformed as they hear a voice from heaven that comes down and says to them, listen to him. Listen to him. Jesus went to the mountaintop not just to be transformed himself, but also to offer Peter and James and John the opportunity to be transformed with him. Jesus was offering them the opportunity to begin to go a different direction in their lives. Jesus was offering them wholesale change, and he was offering them the opportunity to take in God's presence and then to allow it to shine through them to the world around them. Isn't that what God offers to us as well? The opportunity to receive his light, to receive God's light, to receive God's love, to take it in and to allow it to shine around us. That experience for Peter and James and John scared the you-know-what out of them. It scared the you-know-what out of them. Why is that? It scared them because sometimes staying exactly where we are is so much easier. easier. It is so much easier to stay exactly where we are, in that place that we are comfortable, in that place where we are familiar. But yet sometimes God comes into our lives and into our hearts and invites us to do things differently, to think differently, to experience life differently, to be different along the way. And that is scary. And what I want to say to you is that also, sometimes the church is a scary and dangerous place, because in the church sometimes God comes to us, invites us to do or to be in ways that we've never been before. One of the places that the church can be about is helping to reconcile people with God and with neighbor, and to help transformation take place neighbor to neighbor. I mentioned last week that, or 2 weeks ago, that we had this conversation with this woman. And this week, Lyanna had another conversation on Thursday with this woman, this resident of our community. And she talked with her, and they originally were planning just to visit for about 5 minutes. But from what Lyanna reports, you visited 30 minutes? 30 minutes? And they had a conversation about those people that our church helps. And in the course of the conversation, Lyanna invited her to, well, let's go meet some of those people. And so she took her over to Crossroads. And you know, when you get to know someone's story, when you get to know someone's name, something takes place. Transformation begins to take place. And what I want to say to you this morning is that transformation began to take place in the life of this woman, this resident of our community that Lyanna was visiting with. As she began to know the names and the stories of the people who were gathering at Crossroads on Thursday, transformation began to take place. We as the body of Christ, we as the church, are called to be a vessel in which transformation can take place, a faith community in which transformation can take place, not only in our lives, but in the lives of all of those who we touch and who we interact with. And so I'd like to invite each of you to ponder ways that you can personally climb the mountain with Christ. What are some ways that you can climb the mountain, and what are some ways in which you can put yourself in places or situations where God can transform you as well? So what are those special places? What are those special times? What are those special moments in your life in which God can speak, in which God's power can be experienced and felt? I don't know what they are for you. One of the things that we do each week is we pass out to you this sheet of paper. We call it the Grow, Pray, and Study Guide. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but over here to the left on the Grow, Pray, and Study Guide is a little place that's got some lines in it. You know what those lines are for? Those lines are for you to write down something that speaks to you during the sermon, some way in which God may be speaking to you, something that you hear that kind of makes sense for you. What I would invite you to do this week is to take a little bit of time and maybe write down some thoughts. Write down, maybe draw a picture, or write a poem, but take some time to kind of ponder, where are the places, what are the situations that God might be calling me to, in which God can transform me? What are some ways in which God might be seeking to transform my life? Ponder that and think about that and write those down. And then what I'd like to also invite you to do is just this week to open yourself up. Open your eyes, open your heart. Be aware of the ways in which God may be speaking to you this week. Be aware of the ways in which God's love may be coming into your heart this week. You know, so often we close ourselves off from the power of God in the midst of us. And so I just like to invite you to open